Welcome, everyone, to the Cybersecurity Podcast. It's the Cybersecurity Podcast with a little extra BS. I'm Andrew Nuxel.
And I'm Nathaniel Vick.
And today we have a special guest joining us. We have Dave Hatter. He's a cybersecurity evangelist and expert, and we're lucky to have him to cover an important topic for many of us, which is cybersecurity as it applies to travel. So, Dave, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Like to introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, the pleasure's all mine, guys. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I think, most people who aren't in the business probably don't really put enough thought into how travel could impact their privacy and security. So I think it's a good topic, and I look forward to diving into it. Just quick background. I work for a managed services provider in Cincinnati called Entrust IT. I've been in the business about 30 years, most of my time in the industry as a software engineer. And about, 8 or 9 years ago, I started to make the switch into more of a full-time cybersecurity role, primarily because I continued after 20 plus years of software development and teaching software at some local colleges, seeing the same kind of crappy, bug-filled privacy and security dumpster fire software time and time again. You look at like the OWASP top 10, you see SQL injection on the list for 20 years. And I started to think, as our society becomes increasingly digital and there's software in everything, your doorbell, your car, your toilet, whatever, right? And it's all interconnected APIs, dependencies, who knows where this stuff came from, supply chain attacks. We really ought to get serious about security in general and software security specifically. So that's how I got to where I am today, was really concerned, societal level, existential concern about our increasingly digital, and I would argue increasingly fragile society. So that's a little background about.
Awesome. Appreciate that. So we'll jump right into it, again, talking about concerns and ways to protect oneself in terms of travel. And let's just start off with, when you're, whether it be on a plane or in a hotel or even just at your local cafe, public Wi-Fi or free Wi-Fi seems to be available, or paid for Wi-Fi for that matter, in many different areas, locales, establishments. Dave, what would you suggest is the best way to protect yourself, or some steps that a listener might want to take to protect themselves from public Wi-Fi concerns?
Well, I think this is a super important question, Andrew, and obviously folks like the FBI have weighed in on this kind of thing for some time. So I always like to encourage people, and I couldn't get my tinfoil hat filter to work on this. So people should understand straight out of the gate, I'm a tinfoil hat guy. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you, because they are. That said, I can tell you, I don't use public Wi-Fi, period. Now, I know that's impractical for some people, but for me, if I'm out in public and I need to get on the internet beyond whatever capabilities my phone would provide inherently, I've got an iOS-based phone, I'd use the hotspot on my phone, and even then, I'd still use a VPN. I like Proton VPN for my personal stuff, for work. We're using the Cisco VPN. But, my first advice to people would be, don't use public Wi-Fi. Don't get on any Wi-Fi network if you're not sure about the security of that network. I don't think the average person knows about things like a Pineapple device. Any one of the three of us might be sitting outside the Panera you're at, or the Marriott or whatever, with our Pineapple and sucking down all of your data. Again, I realize the average person's not schooled on this, and that's why, in general, my advice is don't use public Wi-Fi. If you are going to use public Wi-Fi, again, get a phone that's got hotspot capability, get an unlimited data plan. I'm never anywhere without my computer. I'm always going to use a computer over a phone if I can, because I like the full-size keyboard and mouse. But if I need to get on the internet, I'm going to use the hotspot on my phone. I'm still going to use a VPN. And as a bare minimum, I would say no one should ever use any public Wi-Fi anywhere without at least a VPN, a virtual private network, and a trusted VPN, Nord, Proton, someone like that, or, more of an enterprise grade, Cisco, something like that, to make sure that you can protect the privacy and security of your data as it's being transferred over that Wi-Fi network.
You mentioned the importance of connecting to a VPN, and then one of the things that I try to do is, if I need to, my cellular data doesn't work, connect to like a travel route or something, and then I can connect to that hotel Wi-Fi and then pop on a VPN. That's another way that I found was helpful.
Yeah, if I was in a hotel, also because I know that if I'm on a wired connection, it's not only going to be more secure. Theoretically, who knows what the switches or firewalls, whatever behind the scenes are doing, but I'm generally going to get better performance. If I'm in a hotel and there's an Ethernet jack, I also don't go anywhere without an Ethernet cable. I'm going to plug into that jack, right, before I would use their Wi-Fi. But in general, I try to avoid the Wi-Fi And even though to your point, Nathaniel, yeah, I can't always get on, but I'll be honest with you. You know, I've got a Verizon phone, and generally speaking, as long as I'm not too far out in the sticks somewhere, I can get on the hotspot on my phone.
Yeah.
And it works really well. So that's always my go-to advice to people. Use a hotspot, you know, use a VPN as well. And, you know, you're going to be way more secure than the average person who just flits into McDonald's and suddenly connects to their Wi-Fi and, you know, it's God knows what happened behind the scenes.
On that note, Dave, how do you feel about VPNs that are included with a particular browser? So let's say Brave, for example, has a VPN that's built into it. Brave's a little bit more secure, I think, than some of the other browsers, but not that I trust any browser. They're open source and vulnerable, and many of them are built on Chrome. So if there's a Chrome vulnerability, there's going to be a Brave one, and so on. But any thoughts on the VPNs that might be included with the browser?
So I think you raise a really interesting point. I am a Brave fan. I mean, also, again, to try to be fully transparent with people, I am not a fan of Google. You know, we can go down the Google hole as far as you want. You know, their whole business model sucks as far as I'm concerned. So I don't use Chrome. I don't use their search engine. I try to avoid anything from Google. That said, I am a fan of Brave. I pretty much use sort of, depending on what I'm doing, like for our work-related stuff, since it's primarily Microsoft-based, I'm using Edge for the simplicity of the SSO and all that. And then for my personal stuff, I'm usually using some combination of Firefox or Brave. You know, again, for my personal stuff, I use Proton VPN. I use Proton Mail. I'm a Proton fan. It's a logless VPN. And one of the pieces of advice I always give to folks is, you know, I don't know everything there is to know about this. You know, could there be a better choice than Proton or Nord or whatever? Yeah, maybe. So for non-technical people, I'll usually tell them, look, if you want to know what's the best antivirus software, the best VPN, whatever, you know, if you have a nerdy friend like one of you guys or me, you can ask what you use. But I'll just tell people, like, go to CNET, go to ZDNet, go to Tom's Guide, go to Consumer Reports, pick 3 or 4 different reputable organizations, because every year they'll put out a report. Here's the 5 best VPNs for 2024. Here's the 5 best this, the 5 best that, whatever, right? And, you know, when you see something like, again, not to plug Proton too hard, although I'm a big fan, I pay for the Proton stuff because I want the added value. You know, when you see Proton VPN on the Tom's Guide top 5 and the CNET top 5 and the ZDNet top 5 and the TechCrunch top 5 and the Consumer Reports top 5, well, that's probably a pretty good product, right? Because they've got editors and experts that are vetting this stuff, right? They're testing it, they're tearing it apart, they're vetting it. Because the last thing you want is to go download that awesome free VPN you just found through a poison Google search or something and find out the damn thing is actually, you know, malware disguised as a VPN. So my advice is, you know, unless you already have an into something because you have a trusted person that can tell you, go do a little research, find something that makes several of these magazines top 5 list. It's probably going to be a good choice for you. Again, I've used Nord in the past for my personal stuff, and we have enterprise grade stuff for work. But, you know, I can tell you, if I'm not on the work VPN, I have my Proton VPN engaged all the time, not only because I want that extra level of security, I'm trying to choke off the flow of my data to people like Google, for example. So to answer your question specifically, though, Andrew, you know, I would suggest that because I trust Brave and I've never seen I'm not aware of any concerns around Brave, right? I would say the Brave VPN is better than no VPN, but I would prefer, you know, one of the strong arguments I would try to make to people is you got to trust the provider, right? To make sure that they're doing what they say they're going to do. And then I want the logless VPNs. Now I haven't dug too deep into the Brave VPN because I'm already paying for Proton. It works well. But I guess to try to answer your question specifically as possible, I think assuming you trust the browser, the built-in browser VPN is better than no VPN, but I would probably still personally lean towards a separate VPN provider. And also, again, to try to, not because I have anything nefarious to hide, I'm just trying to choke off the flow of data to these surveillance capitalism companies like Google and Meta. And, you know, to the extent I can put data in a bunch of different places and make it really hard for them to aggregate my data, I'm going to do that because I'm just that kind of guy. So, you know, trying to mix it up a little bit as well. But I think any VPN, assuming it's trustworthy, is better than none for sure.
For
Good
sure.
advice, I think.
Yeah, I think it's important too. Like privacy is one, even if you don't even care about security, which I argue is pretty important. It's you mentioned some great points, like all these devices and hackers sitting on these public open Wi-Fi areas and restaurants and stuff. At least care about your privacy, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a privacy-minded guy. I hate the surveillance capitalism that powers all this stuff. I mean, I understand how we got to where we are. I understand how it works, and I don't necessarily begrudge these companies for what they're doing. They're making a lot of money, and I get that to the average consumer, the trade-off is worth it. But that's because they don't have informed consent. No one can read the 80 pages of legal mumbo jumbo and understand what they're signing up for. And, you need to go no further than just look at like the Apple privacy label for TikTok. I'm trying to convince people all the time. And while I'm not a TikTok fan, pick any app and then go look at the Apple privacy label and then ask yourself, well, why does this app need to basically suck up every conceivable kind of data off my phone to be a flashlight app or whatever it is, right? So again, if you have fully informed consent, if you understand what these apps are collecting and you go into it with eyes wide open and you're willing to trade off all of this sensitive and valuable data about yourself, your contacts, everything that's on your phone or now your car or whatever else, right? They would have these wonderful smart devices. And I don't know if you guys happen to see the recent patent filed by Ford where they're saying they're going to listen to your conversations while you're driving and then basically based on your location and what you're saying, serve up ads. So guarantees now Ford goes right to the top of the list with Google. I will never buy another Ford, never. But anyway, I'm going down a rabbit hole here. My point is, I am not, if you fully understand what you're signing up for and you want to make that trade-off, fine. But I don't think the average consumer does. And I think if they did, they'd be a lot less inclined to want to continue to provide data to these surveillance capitalism companies like Alphabet/Google and Meta/Facebook. So I'm trying to help people understand why it's not such a good idea and, use privacy-oriented tools and techniques wherever possible to choke off that flow. And that's the main reason why I'm using a VPN is I'm just not going to give them any of my data if I can help, especially Google.
All right, well, let's move on. We can go on about VPN and privacy for a long time, but another topic that I think not a lot of people know about, especially if they're not tech savvy or really investigating travel-related concerns, is the security of charging stations, the potential issues with plugging your device into any old USB at any given establishment again, and some of the things that can go along with that and things you've heard or seen with security around charging stations.
Yeah, so I'm sure you guys are both well aware, in the business, it's called juice jacking. And, the idea that you're going to get some sort of infection by, to your point, Andrew, just plugging into any old USB port. Now, I can honestly say I've seen organizations like the FBI warn about this, but I've never really seen any credible reports of it actually happen. That said, it certainly could happen. And I think it goes beyond this because there are plenty of credible examples out there of you go rent a car, for example, on vacation. You plug your phone into its infotainment center, all your data gets copied down to that infotainment center, and then you turn the car back in. Well, what happens to your data? And there's been numerous reports out there where like one guy went out and bought a bunch of infotainment centers from junkyards and found all kinds of wild sensitive stuff on there. So I think there's the more immediate concern from a travel perspective. Hey, my battery's getting low. I'm in the airport. They've got some USB port plug type things over here. I'm just going to go plug it in. And, my advice to you, not only because I understand that it's at least theoretically possible and you have organizations like the FBI warning against it, you shouldn't do that, right? You should not just, without getting too far astray on the innuendo aspect of this, you shouldn't just plug your cable into any open port you find out there, right? I mean, that would be true of an Ethernet jack or anything else. You don't know what's behind it. You don't know what could be connected to that and could potentially infect your device. Now, to that end, you can buy special connectors that plug into your cable, to theoretically only allow the electrical flow through and not any data transfer. Again, being the paranoid tinfoil hat guy that I am, I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to plug my phone into any random USB port I find somewhere. My advice to folks is if you're traveling, buy a battery pack, charge up the battery pack, take it with you, then this won't be a concern. And worst case scenario, and I've done this many times because I went off sort of ill prepared, okay, if I need battery power, I can plug my computer into the regular port in the wall, and then I can plug my phone into the USB port on the computer and charge off of it, or I can take a charging block, right? So whether you get like they're often called cable condoms, that only allow the data through, or which again, I would trust that less. Most of that stuff comes from China. Who knows if it works as advertised? Take a charging block with you, plug into the regular, 110 outlet on the wall, buy a battery pack, charge it up, or take a computer and use the USB port off another trusted device like that. But yeah, I'm a tinfoil hat guy. I'm not going to plug my phone into a random USB port and just hope that it all works out. There's just too much risk there.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think it's easy to do. I think the convenience piece, we talk about that, and the Wi-Fi, it's very convenient.
Yep.
Same thing with USB. Kind of another
Real quick,
topic too.
Nathaniel, convenience is going to burn our whole society down. I'm really convinced because I'm a regular guy, right? I work in this business, but I'm a normal guy. I don't want a whole lot of extra friction in my life and so forth either. So I understand the allure of the convenience of this stuff. But if you step back and you understand it at the kind of level of people that work in the business, there's so much risk with this stuff that it's, in my opinion, the convenience is not worth the risk, especially because for almost every one of these things we're going to talk about today, there's a relatively easy alternative solution.
Right.
You just have to think ahead a little bit and be prepared, right? And then you don't have to take these risks.
Definitely. And I think kind of it's easy to do. And like I explain it to some of my not as techie friends and the dangers of it. And it's easy for security professionals, IT, to get a little bit paranoid.
I know it probably seems far-fetched to people, but you guys know as well as I do, it's entirely within the realm of possibility that you could go into an airport, plug your phone into a USB port, download some kind of malware, keystroke logger of some sort, for example, and now the bad guys have access to everything you do, right? All of your accounts, all of your credentials. Could I, through some sort of juice jacking, download a keystroke logger and eventually drain your bank account? Yeah, it's entirely possible that could happen. And I get that it's hard to convince people that. I think a lot of people are just like, yeah, that could never happen to me. Who's going to attack me? And my answer is always, hey, your money spends, man. Your money is valuable. They just want your money. They're not thinking, hey, I think I'll go after Andrew Nuxall today. It's, you made yourself an easy target and they exploited you because you made yourself an easy target.
For sure. All right, moving on. So another thing that, or at least I've seen a lot about, looked at into a lot, are QR code scams. And so if you're out traveling or just, at a restaurant, it's really common, especially in today's day and age, to not get a paper menu or a handheld menu, but instead use your phone to scan this QR code. And that applies to many things, parking, you name it, QR codes everywhere. What are your thoughts about QR codes and the safety and security around that as the means to access information, menus, et cetera?
It's funny because, when doing a lot of presentations in the Cincinnati area on cybersecurity, I usually bring up QR codes because, again, it goes back to what I said before about convenience. I get the convenience factor of QR codes, right? It's a three-dimensional barcode. It can pack a lot more information in than the traditional barcodes we're all familiar with. And I understand it not only has a cool factor, but it's super convenient to be able to scan a QR code. The problem with QR codes, though, to the average person on the street is there's no way you can look at one and know what it does, right? And, you can have all kinds of malintent built into that QR code. It can cause all kinds of different actions potentially once you scan it. And, it's well documented examples around the country where, for example, you think you're paying the parking company because of the QR code on the parking meter, but bad guys came along and put a new QR code over top the QR code on the parking meter. And when you scan that QR code, you're logging into their bogus app. At best, they might steal your $6 or $12 or whatever. At worst, they might get your credit card number and or credentials for some kind of account. And we all know, unfortunately, people continue to use, they don't have unique passwords on all their accounts. They use the same credentials over and over. So yeah, again, total tinfoil hat guy. Okay, so take it for what it's worth. There is absolutely no chance I would scan around. Now, if I'm with you, and I'm a big fan of this, by the way, and a lot of people don't know this handy little trick. If you have the LinkedIn app on your phone, like you're at a conference or something, you can go to the search bar on the LinkedIn app on your phone, and there's like a little doohickey that shows up in there. And when you click it, it will generate a QR code that someone else that has the LinkedIn app can scan, and you can make a connection. So I don't even carry business cards. For the most part, if I'm, trying to connect with you somewhere, I'm going to use the LinkedIn app like that. Well, okay, I know that QR code is coming from the LinkedIn app on your phone. I'm going to trust that. But in terms of could you walk into a restaurant and there's a QR code on a menu and some nefarious person has come in beforehand and put a new QR code over top of that? Well, absolutely. If I'm walking down the street and I see a QR code on a bus stop or the side, I'm not going to scan. I'm just not, because I understand there's risk associated with it and I can't, with a naked eye, determine what it's going to do. So my advice to people is, my advice is it goes across many topics. Always be skeptical, always have a healthy dose of paranoia, always realize that, there's risk with so many of these things. And if you approach it like that, I'm not saying I won't scan any QR code ever. I just told you I'd scan your LinkedIn QR.
Yeah.
If I'm in a place, if I went to a conference and the conference organizer handed me a brochure they had printed up, they had a QR code on it, I might scan that. But I know that, I don't necessarily, I can always go around the QR code and just hand enter the URL, right? I can don't trust and verify. I can go out of band. So yeah, as a general rule of thumb, I'm not going to scan QR codes, and I advise people against it unless you have a very high degree of confidence that the thing is legit. If you're working in a factory and you're, scanning shelves of stuff with a scan gun and there's QR codes, well, probably okay. But yeah, any random thing you find out in the wild, I would not scan.
And they're extremely easy to spoof. It's extremely easy to.
I've seen this app now. I think it's an open source app, and you can scan the QR code. It'll do like a virus total scan on it. Make sure it's okay. I haven't tested it out on my phone. I've been trying it on my computer. It's pretty cool. But yes, it still has that verification. Now I guess you implicitly trust the app.
Yeah. And who knows what information you're trading off with it, right?
Yep, exactly.
I mean, that is an interesting idea. I didn't know about that, Nathaniel.
Yeah, so like it does a scan of the picture. You can upload a picture to that website. It's got a website version, I think an app version, but it's pretty cool.
Interesting.
All right. Next thing is, in the event you're out and about, you lose a device, have a device stolen, what should an individual do? And do you have any advice for organizations on how to handle that as well?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're in a bring your own device type of environment, you might have limited control. I mean, maybe you install some kind of MDM software or something like Microsoft Intune. Unfortunately, what you need to do is going to kind of depend on the capabilities of that device and how much control you have over. For an organization, my suggestion would be, and I know this is painful, but I'm not a big fan of BYOD in an enterprise, commercial type of environment. I think you're better off to just go ahead and provide devices where you can lock them down, use some kind of MDM software or something like Intune and have full control over it. I mean, I get it's more expensive because you have to buy those devices, but as more people do more sensitive things on their phones and your corporate data has more opportunity to get into that phone, you're creating a lot more exposure for yourself. And whether it's the new SEC reporting rules or CMMC or whatever, insurance companies getting a lot more stringent. My advice would be don't go with BYOD if you can help it, and take full control of those devices. And again, use something like Microsoft Intune or some kind of MDM product to lock those things down so that if and when a device is lost or stolen, you can wipe it and have a high level of assurance that your sensitive data is going to be destroyed on. From an individual perspective, obviously that gets a little trickier. My suggestion to you is if you lose a device and, device kind of varies. Is it an Android phone? Is it an iOS phone? Is it a PC or whatever? But one of the first things you should do on your phone, assuming you don't mind the location tracking, and again, this gets into more of the privacy sort of aspects, turn on the Find My Device feature so that you can, or whatever it's called on your platform. I think Apple calls it Find My Device, and I think on Android it's called something slightly different, but it's more or less conceptually the same so that you could potentially find it. Because obviously, if your phone is just lost, there's at least a possibility it could be recovered. You don't want to wipe it. You don't want to go through all that pain, especially if you don't have it backed up. I get that, right? But I think, in my mind, the first step would be to think about, okay, how much sensitive data is on the phone? What have I done to secure the phone physically? Does it have a PIN? Does it use biometrics or something? And that would be my first piece of advice. If you're not having your phone automatically lock and require some type of mechanism to log into the phone, you're just basically asking to get screwed. Because if you do lose the phone, or if the phone is stolen, there's documented cases out there where criminals will wait for you walking down the street to be looking down at your phone and just walk up and take it out of your hand. It's unlocked at that point, right? Yep. And if it doesn't relock fairly quickly, they potentially have access to all your stuff. Hopefully you're using a password manager, these kind of things. But so the first thing is you should definitely have your phone set up to be locked. You should turn on that Find My feature. I would say if you're not sure if your phone is lost or stolen, I would probably take slightly different actions. If I think I just lost it, I'd probably try to find it, try to determine, do I think I could get it back? And, maybe try to reach out to the person, send a message, something like that. If I know it's stolen because it was taken, directly taken out of my hand or something like that, then my advice would be immediately try to lock and wipe the phone. I would eventually report it to the police, but the next thing I would do after trying to wipe the phone, and I know this is painful for people, but one of the reasons why you should use a password manager like 1Password, because it makes your life easier. I would go in and immediately start changing the passwords, especially on my sensitive accounts. I would change the password on master password on my password manager. I always suggest people use MFA, multi-factor authentication, all their accounts anyway. But, again, if I can get your phone and I can unlock your phone, chances are I'm going to have access to all kinds of sensitive things. One of the reasons why people will often end up screwing themselves is, well, what happens if someone breaks into my email? I don't care about that. Well, if I can get into your email account, I can potentially start changing all your passwords. All the information I need to do that is coming to the phone that's now in my possession. I pretty much have the keys to your kingdom potentially. So again, my advice would be, make sure your phone is locked or your device, whatever it is, PC, phone, whatever. Make sure it's locked with some kind of reasonable password. Turn on encryption on it if it's not enabled by default, so that again, if they can't unlock it, then they can't get the data off of it. And then if it has a Find My type of capability, make sure that's turned on. Usually you can just search online and find easy examples of how to do that for your particular operating system / device combo. And then again, if it's lost, I might not take such, stringent action right away to wipe the thing. But if I have a high level of confidence it's stolen, I'm going to wipe the thing. I'm going to call my cell phone carrier, tell them it was stolen. I would also suggest with your cell phone carrier, if they support it, set up an additional PIN. So when someone calls and claims to be you need that PIN to do anything. I would report it to the carrier. I would report it to my insurance company. I would eventually report it to the police. So there's some documentation of that, so that if and when my identity is stolen, if and when my money is stolen, I've got some things to fall back on that from a legal perspective will make it a little bit easier to try to unwind that. So, I've lost a phone in the past. It's been a while, thankfully. It's pretty painful, and thankfully I haven't had one stolen. It's a bad position to be in, especially if, for me, again, I'm going to operate off a full-size computer every chance I get. I'm not doing anything on my phone that I can do from a computer because I want to have a mouse and I want to have a full-size keyboard and the screen that my old eyes can read. So, usually it's not going to be as critical for me if my phone gets lost or stolen as it might be for other people who don't also have a computer. Because, I pretty much have my password manager is on all my devices. My authenticator app is on all my devices. So it's not as much of a crisis for me. If you're doing everything off your phone and that phone is stolen and it's not locked, you're probably going to have a problem on your hands really quick, because they're not stealing your phone for the intrinsic value of the hardware. They're stealing your phone because they want to steal all your money and your information,
Yeah. And it kind of highlights everything we've been talking about. That's the biggest thing. We put so much on our phone, our bank accounts, password managers, SMS. We've got a lot of accounts hooked up with SMS probably. And probably most valuable thing most people have every day as they walk out of the house.
I mean, you make an interesting point, Nathaniel, because so let's say you have a banking app on, and I'll be honest with you. I've got 9 apps on my phone. It's an Apple phone. I have whatever Apple installed on it, and I've got about 9 third-party apps of some sort. And that's about it. I don't have a banking app on my phone. If I'm going to do banking, I'm going to do it from my computer in a super lockdown browser with my ridiculous passwords and my password manager and all that sort of stuff, because I don't want you to be able to steal my phone, somehow unlock it, and then open up my banking app and start stealing all my money. Because we know, again, from a convenience perspective, if you have these apps on your phone, do you have all the security features turned on where you got to log in every time and enter the MFA every time? Probably not, because it's a pain in the ass, right?
So on that note, many times the phone is the multi-factor key
it's
for
your
all of these other
right?
things. So I mean, it's great that we have multi-factor, but a lot of times for example, someone goes out and wants to buy something on Amazon, they have multi-factor turned on. How do they get the multi-factor code? Well, they're looking at their phone, they're getting ready to log in to place an order, and it texts directly to that phone. So if SMS is your multi-factor method of choice, it's likely coming to the same device that you're using to place the order.
Guys.
And then even if you went so far as to set up Authy or Duo or Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator as your multi-factor authentication, guess what? That app is in the same place. So most people, if they're logging in to check their email, go into their banking app, all of that stuff is all on that one device. So it's a really complex problem if you get that lost or stolen. I think a lot of times people underestimate the real impact of it. They just, again, back to your points about convenience. People think, oh man, my life is going to be severely inconvenienced because now I have to go buy a new phone. I'm going to have to re-download all my archives and stuff that I've saved out to the cloud. But in reality, no, you just talk about losing the key to the kingdom. If anybody gets into that, you're in a world of hurt.
You're exactly right. Not only because of like the MFA codes, like you mentioned, and the email account and all that going there, but if you do wipe your phone, if you just reflexively wipe your phone and you don't have that stuff backed up, well, you're in a real world of hurt then too. Like, well, what's the password for my authenticator app and all these? People should really think about how much they depend on that phone and what a potential crisis it would be if it were suddenly gone for whatever reason.
It's been a while, but I did have a colleague that had their phone. It was lost, but there was a reasonable possibility that it had been stolen. And the first thing I said was just go ahead and remote wipe it. A lot of people don't even know that that's an option, but you can, on most of these devices, go out to your account, whether it be a Google account, Apple account, whatever, and remote wipe a device from there. But that does lead to exactly what you said. Okay, now how do you restore all of your stuff? It's one thing to say, okay, I'm going to go out to the iCloud and pull down my data. I'm going to go to Google Cloud and pull back all my photos and stuff. That's the easy part. All your passwords and the pain that goes along with that can really...
Which is another reason why I would strongly recommend to people that you use a password manager like 1Password. I mean, although I think the Apple keychain is a pretty secure password manager, it only works on Apple devices. With something like 1Password, it's on all of my devices, regardless of OS. One of the reasons why I like 1Password, and we mandated it in Trust, but for any Entrust related account, you must have the passwords in 1Password. We use a different product for the customer stuff, and then we're also set up with the family plan, so like I can use it for my personal stuff as well. I love 1Password. It has this extra secret key mechanism that makes it a little more secure than a lot of its competitors. I'm not getting any kind of kickback from them. I would just say to people, it's easy to use, it's easy to implement. You might have a day or two of friction and aggravation trying to get it working, but again, it plugs into all my browsers. It's on all my devices. I have one stupidly ridiculous master password. I've got MFA turned on 1Password. And, if I do have some kind of catastrophe with any one of my devices, all of my stuff is secured in their cloud, right? I don't have a huge concern there because I can get back to it relatively easily.
We talk about a lot organizationally in the cybersecurity community about like testing incident response plans. Well, it's not a bad idea to have a personal incident response plan. Test it out. It probably only takes 30 minutes. What do I do if my phone is lost? And I don't know, try to walk back through what you would do in a scenario like that, maybe.
And I've had organizations that, even the ones that don't have BYO, probably don't have mature policies, process, procedure for individual devices like that. Should something like that happen, it's probably...
I would say that's absolutely true, Andrew. Just from my experience dealing with lots of different companies of all shapes and sizes, I don't think there's a lot of thought going in. And that's why I would argue, again, against BYOD, where you could have a more structured and rigorous control over those devices. And then, okay, Cindy Lou Who loses her phone, I wipe it and start over because, it's a corporate sort of thing. And, I can put it back more easily, hopefully, than, some individual who's now in a world of hurt because they've lost everything.
All right. So we have one more question, Dave, before we wrap it up. It used to be that if you traveled, the most common issues that you might be afraid of happening when you're traveling would be something like your phone getting stolen or maybe a pickpocket or something along those lines. But today, I think it's often overlooked some of the concerns around social engineering and what might happen. If you're a traveler and someone can identify you as a traveler, that might give them, some real ammo to compromise your privacy or other concerns. Any thoughts on social engineering as it applies to travel?
Well, yes, but before I get into that specifically, I would say, if you can afford it, it's always a good idea if you're going to be traveling, especially outside the United States, to take a burner device, take a burner phone, take a burner computer, so that the thing is lost or stolen. And I mean, again, don't take my word for it. Do your own research. You'll find, when you go to places like China, they'll pretty much suck all the data off your device, right? When you're going through the customs. So, I understand that if you take your personal device or your corporate device, there's a good likelihood it's going to be compromised. So again, if you can afford it, good idea to take some kind of burner device. That said, if you look at something like the National Public Data Breach, right? 3 billion records, millions of people in the US, Canada, and the UK had their data stolen. I think one of the biggest concerns is not only the sensitive information, they're like social security numbers that make it easy for identity theft, but for anyone that's ever had to go through a background check process, think of all the sensitive information, all the things like, all the places you've worked and all the places you've lived and
Right.
the name of your mom and your pets and all this stuff, right? That would make it much easier for you to be social engineered, because now I can use great AI tools like Grok or ChatGPT to write perfect emails, perfect text messages in native languages that I might not speak. So, I can craft very realistic looking things, and I can stuff them full of information about you that probably outside of a data breach, only the legitimate source would know, right? It's one of the downsides, I think, of these data breaches is they're just filling criminals with lots of useful information to craft much better attacks on unsuspecting people. That said, I mean, yeah, if you're traveling, I think especially in, as soon as you get outside of places like Europe and the United States, you should definitely be on guard. Yes, they will steal your stuff. They'll steal the device because, a lot of these devices, when they are stolen, end up in third world countries to begin with. But usually, in the US, they're not stealing your PC or your phone because of the intrinsic value of the hardware. They want the data on it. They want to steal your identity. They want to steal your money, or some combination of both if they can. And, I think social engineering is always a factor, because anytime, if you go look, if either one of you two seen a guy named Kit Boga, I always like to bring him up for people in face. So he's one of these YouTube scam the scammer guys. His channel's pretty popular. He's pretty famous. And, he'll get these scammers on the phone and or on the line and see how long he can keep them on it. He'll often pretend to be an old lady. He'll pretend he's getting in his car to go to Lowe's and this sort of thing. And I bring it up not only because I think he's doing the world a great service by wasting these people's time. It can be really instructive for people to see the social engineering that's being done by these folks. In some cases, they're hacking into like the boiler room where there's like 50 people sitting in a place in India running these scams all day long on folks. So, if you go to Kit Boga's YouTube channel, or you just look him up online and just watch a few minutes of this, it's also pretty funny, because eventually, sometimes after hours, they figure out they're being scammed, and usually they'll, kind of lose their cool. But it's really instructive from a social engineering perspective to see the sort of thing. These people will tell any lie. They'll pivot in an instant to whatever they think they need to say to get you to cough up whatever it is they're after, So I think, when you're traveling, you need to be extra alert to the fact that there are people, the old school pickpockets, part of whom might want to just steal your phone because it's unlocked and now they got the keys to your thing, as opposed to just your wallet. Obviously, depending on where you're traveling, you might tend to stick out. And, social engineering is, in my mind, the new term for con man, right? It's one of the oldest things in the world. I'm going to use information I can glean about you from looking at you, from information I might find online or whatever, and basically run a con on you until I get what I want. So, yeah, I think, and I think all these data breaches now, is it likely that someone is going to on the street see you and go, oh, let me see if I could find some data breach. No. But, if you're a high value target, certainly as you travel, some corporate executive that's well known or something, could you show up in a place where they have found information about you in a breach and use it in some kind of social engineering attack? I think the obvious answer, sadly, is yes. And I think as you travel, you need to be aware of these kind of things. Are they going to socially engineer you into scanning some of the other things are scanning a QR code, using a Wi-Fi that really is set up to steal your data?
Yeah.
I mean, any of those things are a possibility. And sadly, you really need to just maintain a healthy dose of skepticism, if not paranoia, if you don't want to eventually become a victim of one of these.
Good points. And I think that one of the things you touched on that is really valuable, whether it be watching the scammer or a great example, I won't give up the name, but just do a search on YouTube for social engineering baby crime and watch the lady that goes through the process of scamming a telecommunications provider by pretending there's a baby in the background, how easily they give up information and so on. But the point is, educating yourself on how some of these scams work can help you to identify them and be prepared if something happens. The same way as if you have traveled a lot, you might know that, hey, if you're in a crowded area and people are brushing up against you, you probably want to hold your wallet or make sure that you're not letting anybody get too close, because that's how they get close enough to take your watch off or pickpocket and so on. So yeah, educate yourself as to the way the scams work so that you can protect yourself.
And I think too, being careful what you post on social media too, because If
Yeah.
hackers are ready, maybe you're a high value target and you're posting like, hey, I'm on vacation, that could be an opportunity for the hacker to start either moving on some sort of angle, whether it's your email or whether it's maybe even robbing your house. I think
Yeah.
just not even saying where you're going or you're gone it just
My
limits
advice,
the threat.
yeah, my advice to people is if you feel the need to do something like that, wait until you've returned
Yeah.
and then post the pictures.
I had a great vacation.
post my
It
pictures
just came
when I
back.
come home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. This was a great conversation. We covered a lot. Went a little longer than we typically do, but Dave, we really appreciate your insight. It's been valuable. Shared a lot of good stuff. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, I
Thank you,
appreciate the
Dave.
opportunity, guys. That was fun. And, always happy to try to help folks avoid the kind of scams that we all sadly are increasingly facing.
So for anybody that is traveling, travel safe, stay cyber secure, and thanks for joining us again soon.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.